Patch 13.11 is upon us with some nerfs, some buffs, and some other changes too, including Rel's mini rework. Starting with nerfs, we have a Moo, whose W's base damage is being nerfed after it was slightly overbuffed in patch 13.9. Next we have a Felios, whose bonus attack damage on his passive is being slightly reduced to slow down his early game. Following this, we have a Relian Soul, whose ease mana cost is being dramatically increased in the early game, but will be the same when the ability is fully leveled. In addition, he's also losing some AP scaling on it to reduce the damage as the game goes on. And the final nerf goes to Jinx, whose attack speed growth per level is going from 1.36 down to a flat 1. The first buff goes to Akali, whose Q will deal an additional 10 flat damage at all levels. Following this, we have Azir, whose Q will have a lower cooldown at early levels, and he can now summon his soldiers slightly further away and they will scale slightly better with AP. Next, we have Kalista, who's getting some additional base health and health regen, but losing some AD. However, her attacks will no longer miss if the target leaves vision, and she will now deal 100% of her AD value rather than 90%. In addition, her Q scales slightly better with AD, her E's cooldown is a flat 8 at all ranks, but will deal slightly less damage per stacks. Following this, we have Rek'Sai, whose passive will now see tremors every 1 second, and her underground healing now scales with her max health. In addition, her Q now has a lower cooldown as it's leveled, but she now has to use at least 1 stack every 3 seconds. And in addition, landing a Q while underground now reveals the target for 5 seconds. Next, we have the Croc, whose E's cooldown will be 2 seconds less at all ranks, and his ultimate will have a lower cooldown as it's leveled and deal more passive damage. And finally, we have TF, whose W will now have a 6-second cooldown at all ranks. We also have mini reworks for Ivern and Rel. Starting with Ivern, his Q now has slightly longer range. The cooldown of his Q is reduced by half when using it to travel to non-epic monsters, and he can now recast it to jump directly to his target. His W's extra on-hit damage will now be given to all allies, and when he spawns a brush, it now grants vision for 8 seconds. Also, his brushes now last for 45 seconds or until your team loses vision of it. And in addition, when the shield detonates, if there are no enemies nearby, the duration of the shield is renewed instead. Also, Daisy is getting some massive buffs to hit harder, run faster, and live longer. Rel's changes include higher attack speed, but less armor and magic resist growth, and slightly less movement speed. Her passive will now last slightly longer, but only shreds 2.5% of her target's armor and magic resist. However, this can now be stacked up to 5 times, so will be stronger when fully stacked. And if the target this is applied to dies, she also gets to keep the stats. However, the passive no longer deals bonus damage, and hitting a new target doesn't refresh the duration on all targets. And also, this is no longer applied to minions. Her Q is probably the biggest change to her, as her Q will now stun all targets hit. However, the ability no longer heals, it has less range and deals less damage, and has a longer cooldown. For her W Crashdown, she now gains attack speed and attack range when dismounted. She loses 15% move speed when dismounted, and the ability itself has less range, hits in a smaller area, and knocks up for slightly less time. And her E now causes her and an ally to charge, gaining movement speed, gaining even more if moving towards each other or an enemy. Additionally, it makes her next attack explode in an area, dealing damage. We also have a number of item changes, with Ardent Sense now granting a flat 20% attack speed, Duskblade's execute damage is higher and now applies at 30%, Echoes now deals less damage and heals less in the late game, Gale Force scales less worth crit and deals less execute damage, Kraken now deals physical damage, Moonstone's heals are increased, Quick Blades has been nicely buffed, Runan's deals less on-hit damage, Shiv deals even more damage, Stormrazor loses some damage, and Ghostblade has lost a ton of lethality. And finally, if the Jungler's Smite is fully upgraded, when they take red or blue buff, they drop a copy of it on the floor for an ally to pick up.